counted among the outlaws. He said, "Come, follow me." People from all walks of life since have been becoming outlaws.
What is atheism? We all know generally atheism is a lack of belief in God. And the word describes itself, atheism. So, for instance, you have apolitical, non-political, asymptomatic, no symptoms. So atheism is no theism, which is a belief in God. But to be fair, I don't really care for when non-Christians describe the Christian faith inaccurately. So we're going to talk about atheism today. But instead of just hearing my viewpoint of it, I want to make sure we get it right. So I'm going to read you a definition and some descriptions off of the American Atheist Organization's own website on their self-descriptions. I think you'll find it interesting. They say atheism is one thing, a lack of belief in gods. Atheism is not an affirmative belief that there is no God, nor does it answer any other question about what a person believes. It is simply a rejection of the assertion that there are gods. Atheism is too often defined incorrectly as a belief system. To be clear, they say, atheism is not a disbelief in gods or a denial of gods. It is a lack of belief in gods. That one hurt my head. Said to be clear, and that was super unclear to me. Atheism is not a disbelief in gods. It's a lack of belief in gods. Atheism is not a belief system, nor is it a religion. While there are some religions that are atheistic, for instance, Buddhism, that does not mean that atheism is a religion. They say, to put it in a more humorous way, if atheism is a religion, then not collecting stamps is a hobby. Despite the fact that atheism is not a religion, atheism is protected by many of the same constitutional rights that do protect religion. That, however, they say, does not mean that atheism itself is a religion. They go on to say some groups will use the words like agnostic, humanist, secular, free thinker, or other terms to self-identify. Those words are perfectly fine as a self-identifier, but they strongly advocate to use the word people understand, atheist. So when you hear those other terms, atheists say those are just other ways to say atheism without the stigma, the negative stigma sometimes that can be attached to the word atheism. A little bit more here. Agnostic isn't just a weaker version of being an atheist. It answers a different question. Atheism is about what you believe. Agnosticism is about what you know. Okay, sidestep away from what they're talking about. To me, that's a little confusing because as a Christian, I think they go hand in hand. I wouldn't be able to divide that. I feel like what I believe is what I know. That's why I believe it. I don't have a blind faith. Mine's based on what I feel is reality. Excuse me. All right, to finish up what they had here, I thought this was interesting. They say not all non-religious people are atheists, but the so-called, quote, nuns, not Catholic nuns, not like N-U-N-S, but nuns as in nothing, like N-O-N-E, like people who believe nothing or that there is not a God. The so-called nuns are the fastest growing, quote, religious demographic in the United States. Only about 5% of people actually call themselves atheists, but if you ask them, do you believe in gods, 11% will say no. Those people are atheists, whether they choose to identify as that or not. A recent survey from the University of Kentucky found that as many as 26% of all Americans may be atheists if you tucked all these different titles under one category of a non-belief in God. That's a lot of people. Even more people say that their definition of, quote, God is simply a unifying force between all people. So you're talking like the New Age philosophies, Star Wars, the Force, and that kind of thing, that might be referred to as God, but not a belief in a God, just a universal something, energy. Atheists say those people are under our umbrella. Those are atheists as well. Being an atheist doesn't mean you're sure about every theological question or have answers to the way the world was created or even how evolution works. It just means that the assertion that gods exist has left you unconvinced, or wishing there was an afterlife, or wishing there was a creator, or a specific God doesn't mean you're not an atheist. Being an atheist is about what you believe and don't believe, not about what you wish to be true or that you might find comfort in believing. So we're done with that website. So with that background of atheism, how could someone go from that belief system, which apparently is not a belief system, it's a belief system of not having a belief system, go to finding faith and being so convinced their faith is true? In this case, our conversation today is on Christianity, that we're bringing somebody on that was graduated from Harvard, was in the law business as a career, and came to faith and believed so much that Christianity is true, has now made up to, I believe, 15 faith films, leading the faith genre. And his name is Tim. Orlando Airport, if you hear all that background noise.
Hi, Ken. How are you, man?
Very good. Thanks for joining us. So I think you heard my intro there, all about atheism.
Sure did. Incredibly intelligent.
Yeah, well, it wasn't me. I read their website. But it was very interesting because so that is my question for you. Coming out of that, when you were considered yourself an atheist, what was your worldview? How did you view, or did you care? Did you think about like existential questions, or were you just focused on career? How did you view the world?
Actually, Ken, I was a right-wing conservative as an atheist. I was a right-wing conservative, voted for Reagan, and my extremism was hate, actually, as an atheist. I hated people who I deemed less intelligent, right. And so, I would say I was horrible. I was a racist. I was horrible. I don't mind saying that. I could care less. The only one who can cancel me is Jesus. But
less intelligent, meaning, I'm guessing, because I would feel the same if I didn't have a knowing that this was true. I would think religion is superstition. It's wishful thinking. It's a way to comfort yourself.
Yeah.
Like Richard Dawkins, apologist for atheism, actually, I would agree with him in that religion and Christianity could bring beauty to the world in their stories and in their music and in their art. But other than that, it's ridiculous. And you're believing in fables and folklore.
That's exactly, you hit the nail on the head, Ken. And I think it is, for us former atheists, it's hard to, at that time, to grapple the change that happens when you become a believer. And that change is a miracle. And I think the miracles of God, like where does an orange come from, Ken? Where does a peach come from? Where does life come from? I think deep down inside, and I think Romans 1 says it, everyone believes in God. But I think you have such a hostility that you want to make believe there is no God, even though deep down inside there's a God. And I think you're angry at this God that he would allow, all of this, these crazy things happening in the world. And why doesn't he stop it?
Yeah, that scripture. Scripture says God's revealed in two ways: through His Word and through His creation. And in that, because of the creation part, man has no excuse not to know there's something there.
Yeah, that's right. And Ken, I went on. I was very blessed. I did a movie, an epic journey documentary for Daystar TV, and took us to 29 countries around the world. And I talked to a lot of atheists. I talked to a woman who was an atheist in Africa, not an atheist, but sort of a weak believer. And on Christmas morning, she had no food to feed her 22 orphans. And she said on Christmas morning, she went downstairs, could not even find a can of tuna to feed 22 orphans on Christmas Day in Kenya, Africa. And so she went upstairs and she said, God, if you don't provide food on this day of all days, I quit. I'm out. She was screaming at God, crying. Right then, a knock on the door, right at that moment. As she went downstairs, she opened the doors. There's a Caucasian woman standing right there. And she said, may I help you? And she said, are you the head of the orphan? She said, yes. and she gave her a bag of cash for 5,000 US dollars and said, "Merry Christmas."
Wow.
And she walked out, and then she fell on her knees and said, "There is a God, and this God is real." And I've had so many of those stories around the world of people who were agnostics, atheists, and they found God in incredible ways. We all know that John Newton found God in a storm as well, who wrote Amazing Grace. So these transformations, these coincidences, as the atheists say, are more than coincidences. And I had something amazing happen to me, Ken, when I first became a believer 22 years ago. By the way, Chuck Smith of Calvary Chapel, he baptized me 22 years ago at Calvary Chapel, Laguna Beach. And something strange happened to me that's inexplicable. I was in Hawaii, and it was 4 a.m. because I'm from LA, Los Angeles, so it was 3 hours behind. So it was really 7 a.m., but 4 a.m. in Hawaii, completely dark. And I was struggling with my faith. I just became a believer just 2 months earlier. I lifted up my hands and I said, "God, speak to me," and then nothing happened. And then I really shouted, "God, speak to me." And right then there was a huge thunderclap. It was like that. It was loud as can be. And I'm not kidding, Ken. The sky turned red. The sky turned red. And it was, and then it went back to quiet. And I almost fainted on the beach at 4 a.m. in Hawaii.
Wow. So 2 months before that, you
just became a Christian.
Yeah. So what led you to, how did that happen?
How did I become a Christian?
Yeah.
I became a believer. I got fired from my law firm. I was practicing law, and I got fired from my law firm because I had a bad gambling problem. And I was going to Las Vegas every other day, and there's no law firm that would accept that. And they found out, and they fired me. And then I went to Hong Kong to try to find myself. And I'm not Chinese. I'm Korean, Japanese. But I went to Hong Kong to find myself. Came back, and I went to USC Film School. So I decided to do the one thing that I thought I was called to do. Not called to do by God, but called by myself to do for my talents. And I directed a film for Universal Studios within a year and a half. But then what happened was I went to Manila, Philippines, which is called the party capital of Asia, went to strip club. And then what happened was I gambled away all of my director's salary in one night of blackjack. And so I went back to my hotel in the Shangri-La in Manila, Philippines, and almost had a breakdown and very suicidal, reached for a Gideon's Bible. And I read the questions in the front of the Bible. Where are you going? What is the meaning of life? Does Jesus exist? Who is Jesus? And I accepted Jesus right there in my hotel room. The worst night of my life turned out to be the best night of my life, Ken. And never looked back, never gambled again, straight arrow the whole way. And it was really incredible. I was in my 30s, by the way. I was in my 30s. I'm in my 50s now.
So we have a lot of people listen to this that are Christian, but we have a lot that aren't. As a matter of fact, I always have new age psychic people wanting to be guests on and things.
Sure.
And so they may not understand the profoundness of what could happen there when you answer some, what I call existential questions, like why are we here, whatever. And their answer is Christ. So coming from an outside viewpoint, you're in a moment of desperation, but what if it was a Buddhist handbook, or what if it was a Hare Krishna pamphlet? What made it that Jesus became so real to you that it transformed your life and not just gave you a night of hope?
It was brilliant, Ken, what you just answered. And what's interesting was when I first became a Christian, I took a class called Perspectives. And in that class, we read the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu Vedas, the Buddhist meditations. And it just confirmed what I always knew. And that is the Bible is history from beginning to end. And the meditations are philosophy. The Hindu Vedas are philosophy. The Bhagavad Gita, which is a companion piece to the Hindu Vedas, is philosophy. And so the Bible is the only book that has a beginning and an end and history behind it. But everything that I read just confirmed what I already know anyway. And that is that there's a savior, Ken. And I was able to talk to a Buddhist monk And I said, well, what happens to Christians when we die, according to the Buddhist? And he said, as long as they maintain the 5 moral precepts, they don't steal, they don't kill, you know. And it's the same thing as the 10 Commandments, he said. But you have 10, we have 5. And he said, Christians will go to nirvana as long as you maintain those as best you can, the 5 moral precepts. And then I talked to a Muslim scholar at UCLA, and I said, what happens to Christians on a Muslim point? He goes, only Christians will be forgiven by Allah. I said, really? And he said, yeah, because you believed in Jesus. You just had it wrong. He's only a philosopher. He was only a prophet. He wasn't the son of God. But anyway, only Christianity says, look, if you don't believe in me, the son of God, there's a problem. And well, I'm not asking you for a lot. I'm asking you to believe that I sacrificed myself. My blood cleansed your sins because we're all sinners. And that's what will get you to heaven. And it's profound when you think about what God did for us, because he cannot tolerate sin. And I think just in my own life and seeing myself as a former sinner. And by the way, Cuba Gooding Jr., who's in my movie, became a Christian on our set. He recommitted his life to Jesus, yeah. And so he's praying now with me. We're praying like 15 minutes every day, and he's a changed man. You know, well, we're talking about who's the biggest sinner. I'm saying, no, I'm the biggest sinner. He's saying, no, I'm the biggest. And that's a transformation. You know, that's no longer pride. That's no longer anything, but we're just condemned before Jesus, before God above, and we're all sinners saved by the mighty hand and grace of God. And I think it's beautiful. You know, it's a beautiful story. But I've seen too many miracles, Ken, from the Christian point of view. And you know, it's interesting in the Bible, Jeremiah 29:11. If you draw closer to me, I'll draw closer to you. And I ask a lot of my atheist friends that, do you actually spend time trying to figure out whether God exists? Trying to, have you ever read the Bible? You know, you read so much. You read the New York Times, but do you ever read the Bible? And they all say no. They all say no. They're too busy to read the Bible, Ken. They're atheists on a mission. That mission, I don't know what it is, but that mission is emptiness. Maybe it's a career. Maybe it's finding peace by being busy. Maybe it's beer. Maybe it's football. A lot of my atheist friends are football fans, you know, and I'm like, you're just as religious as me, man. Yeah. I go to church, you go to a stadium. Even though I watch football, I'm not saying that as Christians we can't watch football, but they're just as religious. And they're the New York Patriots fans. They're in 0-degree weather, Ken. We don't even do that as Christians. We don't go to church in 0-degree weather. So they're very religious about, you know, Tom Brady and the Patriots. So they're all religious in many ways. But I'm sorry if I gave you a circumvented answer.
No, great.
You know,
what advice would you give to those who are still seeking, or they're looking into philosophies, and or they're atheist or agnostic or whatever, then they view religion as a man-made institute, or even if they believe in something, it's one path up a mountain of many paths to the same God. And what advice would you give them to find what we call truth?
You know, Ken, my advice is just look around the world. And, you know, I know it sounds crazy. My theology is more Calvary Chapel, of course, which is more eschatological and end times. But I will tell you something scary, Ken, that might scare them. And that is, Jesus predicted the COVID. He said there will be a pandemic that will be worldwide. He predicted the weather right now of extreme climate change. It has nothing to do with oil. I believe it's the Lord is coming sooner than later, because he said, the waves will perplex the nation, meaning weather will be perplexing a nation. Whether I'm right or wrong from a theological point of view, and you may not believe in end times, I do, but we're both going to heaven. So that's not a problem, kid. That's not salvation. But I will tell you this much, if half of the scholars, including Billy Graham, John MacArthur, Charles Spurgeon, many of them believed in the end times when it was the end times. And right now, if we truly are in the end times and the Lord is coming sooner than later, and you're seeing mass shootings like we never have, you know, Ken, I don't know if you're my same generation, but I remember the 80s. There was no mass shootings outside of the guy in McDonald's San Ysidro. And then in the 70s, there was a guy in the Texas Tower. You remember that dude? And he killed people in the University of Texas or whatever. But that was mass shooting. That was it. And then it got really brutal in the late 90s. And now it's mass shootings every day or often weekly. And it's so many mass shootings we can't even keep track. And the Bible is very clear that in the last days of 2 Timothy, man will be brutal. They'll be violent. They'll be without mercy. And we're seeing that more than ever. So if the Lord were to come today, I would tell every atheist, man, either if it is the rapture, you don't want to be left behind. And if there is no rapture, second coming, there's no chance. So whether you believe in the rapture or not, if there isn't a rapture and the second coming, there's no second chance. If there is a rapture, you do have a second chance, but left behind 7 years of the Great Tribulation, that's going to be horrible. I mean, it's going to be horrible. And there's going to be bloodshed like you can't believe. So if you think it's bad now with all these carjackings, mass shootings, store lootings, it's going to be 10 times worse if half of the scholars are right and the rapture, which is in the Bible, by the way, rapturos in Latin, harpazo in Greek, and 1 Thessalonians 3, being caught up means rapture. Right. If there is a rapture, then we're in it. I mean, non-believers are in a world of trouble. There is one answer, and that's Jesus. And for all of the things, it's not Joe Biden, Donald Trump. It is Jesus. And you don't want to miss the boat with Jesus. You can miss the boat with voting for Biden, but you can't miss the boat with Jesus.
Yeah, and that your passion in that is seen through your movies. And tell us about the one you have coming out that you just finished.
Oh, thanks, Ken. Well, Firing Squad opens in theaters nationwide August 2nd. And we're trying to win 1 million people to Jesus through this film. We have an altar call at the end. This is based on a true story of 3 Christians who are former drug dealers. I apologize. I'm at the airport. That's why you're hearing this little bit of racket. Sorry about that, Ken. I had an urgent flight to Atlanta for our premiere tonight. But the Firing Squad comes out August 2nd. 3 Christians, it's based on this true story of 3 Christians who are ex-drug dealers. And they found Jesus in prison, and they went out singing Amazing Grace to their execution, all of them. And they all came from various backgrounds too, Ken. 2 were atheists, 1 was a Buddhist, and they all came to Jesus. True story, and they won even the warden of Christ. So, and I interviewed, by the way, a Yakuza gang member, and he did the same thing you asked me in the beginning of the show. He had a choice between reading the Buddhist meditations, the Bible. He read them all while he was in the hospital after being shot in Tokyo as a gang member. He picked the Bible. He went to Bible college. He's now a pastor in Tokyo.
Wow.
So, and he had his fingers chopped off.
That's crazy. And you have some recognizable actors in this one. You already mentioned one of them, right?
Yeah, we have Oscar winner Cuba Gooding Jr. We have Kevin Sorbo, of course, one of the most recognized Christian actors, God's Not Dead, Let There Be Light with Sean Hannity, and a well-known Christian speaker, very, very much an evangelist. Eric Roberts is in our film. James Barrington is in our film. Tapua Aino is in our film. And Madeline Anderson is in our film. She plays a love interest. True story. She got married to James the night before he got executed.
Wow. So how can people support? Of course, people could be listening to this, and this movie was 5 years ago. That's the age of internet, right? But assuming they listen to it pretty quick, it's coming out in August. You said August 2nd. Was that right? Yes,
nationwide, 2,000 theaters. It's a real blessing.
What can they do now to support you other than mark that on their calendar?
They can go to a site called millionsouls.org, and there we're trying to win 1 million people to Jesus from that site. They can just, put their names down and they can be put in the book of life.
Okay, great. Yeah. I'll put information, website and all that in the notes. And one thing I did notice, I was a little surprised about when I watched it, was Cuba Gooding Jr. can sing pretty well.
Yeah, he sure. It's so funny. Who would have believed that, huh, Ken? Yeah. Oh, boy.
He really belted it out. I was pretty impressed.
Oh, thanks, Ken.
All right. Well, I thank you for your time. And
thank you, Ken.
Good luck on your premiere tonight.
Thank you. God bless you, Ken. Thank you.
Counted among the outlaws, he said, "Come, follow me." People from all walks of life since have been becoming outlaws.